Greetings, everyone. My name is Sarah Barnes. On behalf of Campbell & Company, I would like to welcome you to 2018 in Review, Emerging Trends in Philanthropy. Thank you for joining us today. Before we begin today's presentation, I'd like to quickly go through some logistics for those of you who may be new to our webinars. Close any programs that are running on your computer other than GoToWebinar, of course. We recommend calling in with a telephone instead of using your computer speakers. And if you experience any visual issues, send a chat to Campbell & Company or contact GoToWebinar at the number on your screen. Finally, today's webinar will last 60 minutes and you'll earn 1 continuing education credit, and that is good with your participation with CFRE International. Within the next 24 hours, you'll receive an email from GoToWebinar that includes information on how to download your certificate. We won't be sharing today's presentation, but we'll be sending a link to the recording in a follow-up email from GoToWebinar. We do welcome questions, so make sure to use the questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel on the right side of your computer screen, and we'll also hold time at the end of the webinar for Q&A. So I'm super excited to be able to turn this over to Jeff Wilco, Vice President here at Campbell & Company, who has with him Stacy Palmer from the Chronicle. So with that, Jeff, I'm going to turn over to you.
Thanks very much, Sarah, and thank you very much, Stacy, for agreeing to be my partner in crime today. I am Jeff Wilco, Vice President at Campbell & Company, and Stacy is the longtime editor of the Chronicle of Philanthropy, actually founded it, and they just celebrated their 30th anniversary. And so she started when she was 12, and it's so good to have you here. Stacy's been a great partner in this process because she's got a particular view of philanthropy from the top, from a 30,000-foot view of philanthropy. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we're seeing changing. One thing that we've seen is constant in this world is change. And it seems to be happening faster and faster the older I get. So we thought we would take a look at what are some of the changes we're seeing and talk about that a little bit and see what you're seeing out there as well. We're going to have some time for questions and answers at the end. So we'll just survey some of the things that we've been seeing so far. So, of course, the big thing on everybody's mind are the tax law changes. It's been a couple of years now since they were introduced. We're starting to see some things happening from that, and we wanted to look at that a little bit. So, Stacy, you just did an article in the Chronicle recently about the decline of the number of Americans who are giving to philanthropy. What's that about?
It's a very disturbing thing, and I want to thank you all for joining us, and please let us know how we can answer your questions throughout, so keep jotting them down. One of the big trends that we've seen, and the numbers in lots of different places are bearing this out, is the share of Americans who are giving is dropping. It used to be that 60% of Americans give. In the past decade now, it's just half of Americans are giving to charity. And the biggest drop has been in men who are in their 50s. They are quite disengaged from giving to charity. Many of them stopped giving during the recession, and they have not gone back to giving. Now, you might wonder, there are fewer people giving, and yet giving keeps going up. And that is a good thing. We are not seeing a decline in the dollars being raised. But what that means is that these big gifts that we see, wealthier individuals, they are making up for some of that loss we're seeing from the middle income people, for the most part, is who stopped giving. And I think what a lot of people are worried about is, what is this trend going forward going to mean if fewer and fewer people give? And different kinds of groups benefit from the wealthy giving, certainly, than the middle-class donor that might give to different kinds of things. So we're watching to see what kind of shakeout there's going to be.
Right. So do we think that there's a shift in who's getting the money because of that change in where it's coming from?
Absolutely. What you can see is that colleges and hospitals are doing really quite well. Michael Bloomberg just gave $1.8 billion, as everyone saw, to Johns Hopkins to underwrite financial aid so that everybody can afford to attend regardless of their family income. So that's a pretty amazing gift, and we keep seeing more and more like that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that food banks and local charities are getting a share of the money. To be sure, wealthy people like to give to lots of different causes, but there's still a great concern that this is not spread evenly, and that bigger institutions that have very sophisticated fundraisers are great at asking for money from the wealthy, and they're doing very well. But what's happening to other groups that serve the communities?
Mm-hmm. It was interesting, the article that you wrote about the Bloomberg gift, because it's been, large gifts from wealthy donors has been quite controversial lately, and has been getting some pushback. But in that article, you said that the Hopkins gift was, in fact, a good way to use $1.8 billion. Why?
A lot of people think it really was important, in part because it signaled to other donors that they might give for the same purpose, and that if you really care about social mobility, making sure that more people go to college is a good thing. We have had just as many submissions to our commentary section of saying this is a bad thing as well as a good thing, with people saying other colleges could have benefited. If Bloomberg really cared about social mobility, there were other things that he could have done. So it's quite the debate, but a debate is a good thing in philanthropy. Where should the money go, and what does the most good? One of the things that we're looking at, and the reason we put this in the section about tax law changes, is that the tax changes really probably are going to accelerate this trend of the very wealthy giving more. The very wealthy really have the same benefits that they've always had. As a matter of fact, they can now write off 60% of their income versus 50% of their income should they choose to give that in a given year. But if you're a middle-class donor, you might not have much incentive to itemize anymore because of the way the tax law changed. And so the expectation is that as people are closing out this year, this is the first time that they might not have access to a charitable deduction. So I think groups are trying to decide whether they should message about the charitable deduction for those donors who can take it, or whether they might mislead donors a little bit by talking too much about tax deductions that they won't get. So we've seen our readers taking a lot of different approaches to mentioning that year-end tax deadline or not, or at least being a little bit more subtle about it. So we're going to be really watching to see what happens this year. This is a real test of whether the tax deduction matters.
And it's interesting because I've been thinking and saying that it wouldn't affect people's charity, that you're not going to stop giving because you can't deduct it anymore. But that's not actually what I'm seeing. I've had board members from clients say their friends are asking them, if I can't take this, how do I get a deduction? If I don't get a deduction, then what's the incentive for giving anymore? So it is starting to affect people's thinking. So one of the answers to that question is we're seeing a lot of interest in, a lot of complaints actually about the required minimum distribution. So here people who are 70 and a half and older complaining about their RMD and the fact that it pops them into a different tax bracket and they don't really need the money. And so then the answer is, well, then don't take it. You could donate it directly to another organization. Are you seeing that?
Yes, there's a lot of interest in that, and that's a great thing for people to promote, is that if you're 70 and a half and you have to do that distribution, it's a great way to save on your taxes. And people are saying, you know, wait a minute, I don't necessarily need to pass that on to my children. Why don't I put it to use now? So it's an excellent thing. A lot of people don't understand that this rule works that way, so just getting the word out is incredibly important and pretty easy to do.
I can attest to that. People don't know that that's an option. I've been talking a lot about that in front of groups, and I have people always come up to me afterwards and say they want more information on how to do that. Somebody from our church just came to me recently and said, how do I do that? It's very easy. You know, it's really easy. Broker. And I got my mother to do it.
Outstanding.
So a nonprofit
so now you can say anybody can do it, right?
Anybody can do it. My mother can do it. Anybody can do it. One of the interesting things about RMDs I discovered is that they can't put them into donor advised funds. Correct. You have to do it directly to a charity for whatever reason. You can't put it into a DAF and then distribute it later, which is good news for all of you who would rather get the money directly. So that's another thing that you can use as a selling.
It's one of the few things that you know, it says no DAF.
Advantage over the DAFs. Speaking of DAFs, what about appreciated stock?
Well, we're expecting really big donations in stock, and I'm sure Fidelity, Schwab, all the financial institutions that offer donor advised funds are going to have record years because the stock market has, despite its issues every once in a while, it overall has been very healthy, and that means more people are going to give. One of the things, because of the tax law, people expect is going to happen is that people will try to, you can take a deduction if, well, the idea is that you'd probably take the standard deduction if you're not writing off $24,000 or
Right.
For a couple,
right.
$12,000 for an individual, and that's the point where you would decide whether you want to take a deduction or not. So if you, let's say, know that you want to give over time to charity, you can bundle and put the $24,000 into your donor advised fund now, and then give it out over time, and maybe not give anything next year. Take advantage of the deduction this year, not do it next year. I think one of the things a lot of nonprofits are worried about on that is that unevenness. How can you plan for your budget? How do you necessarily know people did that? But we do expect to see more of that. So this is another test that we'll watch to see, are people giving and then doling the money out later, or have they not figured out that that's the way the law works, and we won't see that for a few more years. I mean, you have to remember that people aren't filling out their taxes probably until the spring, and so they don't exactly know how it's all going to work out. So this is a real test year to see what happens, and I've noticed more advice columns in newspapers trying to explain to people how it works. Really important for fundraisers, I think, to get the word out about this is the way it works, and the advantages that still exist, because I think there's a little bit of scariness in some of the approaches people are taking to talking about the tax law, and there's still plenty of benefits from giving.
Right, right. And we're going to see more and more money going into DAPs. So that's not a trend that's going to go away. My wife and I started one a couple of years ago. We said it's time for us to do this, and it was because of the whole appreciated stock concept.
It makes it really easy.
We should do this, and rather than doing it with each charity, we just put it into one with the community fund, community foundation in Northern Virginia, and that's been a great experience. I'm going to see more people doing that. It doesn't. The way it affects our giving is I think we get more strategic, and I think it actually makes us more philanthropic because the money's set aside.
Because you have it there.
Right. So I don't see it as a threat to our world, but it is something we're going to need to understand more. The rules are different. One of the things that's affected is campaign pledges, multi-year pledges. You can't make a multi-year pledge through a donor advised fund. Donor advised funds are now looking at ways to accommodate that. And they're suggesting that they can suggest that they might make a multi-year commitment, but that's not something that your CFO can write off.
Right.
It can put on the books. So you know that your pipeline is there, but it's not a commitment, and that's not something. But we're going to have to accommodate that. I mean, that's a way to get it.
And you can't, a gala, for example, can't be paid for with a donor advised fund. So making sure everybody understands this so the donors aren't upset later. And what a lot of people are doing is mentioning in their direct mail appeals or on their website, just say, call us if you have a donor advised fund, if you need guidance on how to do it. And just mentioning that you can accept donations through a donor advised fund just signals that you're ready for it, you get it, and you want to do that. Just that subtle messaging is working for a lot of charities.
That's great. That's great. What about planned giving? How are the tax law changes what potential impact might they have on planned gifts?
It should encourage more planned giving, certainly with people in that very highest level. There were some estate tax changes, but most people, that nonprofits are going after aren't really even subject to the estate tax. Those are really people who would be starting big foundations. So, the rules are the same and the benefits are the same, and there are great benefits to giving and to thinking about doing that. So I think it's a really opportune time to talk about planned giving.
So I did hear an estate planner suggest that it would be smarter to give the money to your kids and let them take the tax deduction. If you're a married couple with less than $11 million in assets, then just pass the money on to your kids and let them take the deduction, which I thought was a challenging message for all of us. But then the other thing is that because it's not going to affect the estate, it's more likely that people will give it now. So that they can take and I think we're seeing more of that, where people have been stashing, making sure that they had enough for their healthcare needs or whatever it might be, and they're finally at a point in their life where they're realizing we actually do have enough, and we do want to start seeing something more beneficial happen with this. So the conversation can change where people can make legacy gifts during their lifetime, and we're seeing more of that, I think, as well. So what about these donors that we're losing, the mid-level donors? So a couple of things we're seeing going on here. I see a lot of nonprofits that are focusing a lot more on mid-level donors. Part of it is because this trend we've been seeing where smaller donors are going away, and so maybe we've overemphasized major gifts, and we have to get back to the blocking and tackling of getting lower level or average level donors engaged and knowing that it matters. The other thing that we're seeing is that there's a lot of interest in this area with organizations that have been getting significant increase in their donors over the last couple of years with the changing political environment. We see a lot of donations going in that way. But what are you finding in mid-level donors?
Yeah,
An area of interest.
a lot of nonprofits are creating special programs for their mid-level donors, and they're putting more of their fundraisers on the mid-level donor assignment, and in some cases, they're moving people away from direct mail or other kinds of things that weren't as lucrative and investing more in the mid-level donor. And it depends on the size of your organization, but we're talking about people that probably can give $1,000 to $25,000. And those kinds of people, when you give them a bit more attention, tend to be very loyal and give much more. So these efforts are paying off in a very big way. It's become such a significant thing that there's now a listserv of all the people who work on mid-level donors that people can join. I'll tweet out a link to a story that we did about this. But it's really becoming something that people are taking much, much more seriously, in part to combat that problem we talked about. But these are the donors that they don't want all of the attention that a major donor gets, and they're a little bit leery of that in some cases because they realize they probably don't have as much money as the millionaires and billionaires. But they do want to know more about the impact of their gifts. They do want a more personalized experience. So charities that have figured out how to do that, maybe it's a call with the executive director every quarter or something like that, something that's not very expensive to do, but that gives you an inside look at what's going on. Those kinds of things have been really effective and encourage people to keep giving again and again. And what's great about these mid-level donors is once you have them, you can really lock them in. They keep giving year after year instead of those donors who, we all know those first-time annual fund or other people that are just hard to get. These donors are committed to your organization, and many of them will end up in the major gift pipeline at some point. So trying to figure out how to identify them and to make sure that everybody gets a great experience on this so that they can eventually become a major donor is important too. So, it's critical to not say, oh, they're just mid-level donors, I'm going to go focus on my major gifts people. You need to do both.
Right. No, I have to say we're getting a lot more calls. We have a lot more of our clients who are really focused on that area. It used to be they always called asking for help with campaigns or help with major gift initiatives. Now there's more of a focus on an increasing focus on annual giving and on the mid-level donors, especially that handoff from annual giving. Where are those major gift prospects in that base, using a well-designed mid-level donor program to be able to really give them that higher touch, more personalized appeal that they need and will keep them involved. So speaking of which, we've seen a lot of this. I mentioned these activist donors, the ones who've been mobilized in the last couple of years. And we talk about rage giving and the Trump bump, but there is definitely something going on, and a number of organizations out there have seen significant increases. I went to a conference last week. It was the National Leadership Conference on Human and Civil Rights, so ACLU, and lots of human rights organizations, many of whom have seen, almost all of whom have seen increases. Polling the room I was in, anywhere from 50 to 300% increase in the number of donors that are coming in. So they're very focused on retention. How do we get these people in and keep them in? And they've been benefiting for a couple of years now, and they are seeing people stay. And the mantra is inspire them to get involved, educate them as to how their donation is helping and what you're doing that's making an impact, and then engaging them over the long term. The other thing that we've seen that many of these organizations are using very effectively are the Sustainer program.
Yes.
And that's one thing they said the new donors coming in, they were able to get a number of them, a large percentage of them to come in as monthly donors as opposed to a one-time and done, which I think we've seen a lot more of that in Europe than we have here, but now it seems to be finally catching up.
And it's really interesting that it's this that motivates monthly donors, because it is such a, public broadcasting, for example, does a great job of getting monthly donors, but other organizations haven't picked that up as much. And you wouldn't probably have expected that the advocacy groups would be big beneficiaries of it, but that's what this news cycle has done. And there's a constant need to react, and these groups have been very good at keeping people engaged. And you mentioned too the idea of giving them tasks to do, getting them involved in text messaging their lawmakers, or doing something to take an action so that their gift does something, but that they can do something to. I think that you really have to keep coupling that so that people feel that they make a difference. One of the questions I have, and I feel like I'm seeing a little bit of it, is there a bit of fatigue, however, in giving to this cause? One of the things after the Tree of Life shooting in Pittsburgh, for example, we expected to see a bigger bump in the amount of money that went to groups like the Anti-Defamation League, to the synagogue itself. There was a charity that was at the center of it called Highest, and they didn't see that big inundation of giving that we've seen in the past. And I think in part people are starting to feel a bit of helplessness about some of these tragedies. So I think we're going to need to keep getting the message out about, here's why your donation matters, here's what the nonprofit does with it. It's the same challenge that, you have because of all the disaster giving with, the wildfires and all those things. It just starts seeming like it's coming and coming, and people want to feel that they are making a difference rather than they have to keep giving to a crisis again and again.
Yeah, no, that's a real challenge. The numbing
our
sympathies and our empathy.
But I think one of the other interesting things to see is that it is on both sides of the political aisle. And I know there's a study coming out this week that talks about the effect of foundations, small family foundations, wealthy donors, people who are significant givers, but not sort of the biggest foundations. And really, both conservative and liberals say that they are giving more because of the election, because they either want to, cement the policies of this administration or they want to fight against it. But it is absolutely motivating more giving, and more giving to advocacy groups, which is something that we didn't see those donors necessarily giving to before. So that's a really positive sign that they can see that giving to advocacy matters as much as direct services.
Going back to what you were saying about engaging people and giving them ways that they can help beyond just writing their check. And I think the other thing we're seeing is organizations working from program to fundraising and across the organization to think about their donors in a different way, think about their donors and their members as an asset that they can leverage to help with their programming, to help with advocacy, writing letters. We worked with an advocacy organization that was famous for writing letters to dictators, complaining about people who are being tortured. And some of the older donors who had been involved with them for years said, nobody asked me to write letters anymore. And that was what motivated them. That's what kept them involved. And it's like, well, these things do matter.
And as we all know, the millennials want to be more involved than anybody else. So we need to keep going on that big time.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. So let's talk about the changing face of philanthropy, one of your favorite subjects.
Okay.
We're seeing a lot more women in philanthropy, a lot more diversity, and organizations trying to reach out to new audiences. What do we see going on?
This is a really important topic, and this relates a little bit to the slippage in giving that we've seen, in part as America has become a more diverse country. We're not necessarily, nonprofits haven't changed their tactics enough to go beyond the white men that they typically had gone after. And so a lot of groups are experimenting with ways to do things differently. On our homepage today, you'll see a profile of Teresa Gao, who is a Silicon Valley philanthropist who cares very deeply about getting more women into STEM, and her giving is all about that. And we talked about the patterns that she uses to give. She cares very much about whether women are being given a chance, to do more things. She wants to advance them as part of the groups that she supports. She's hesitant about whether to use her name, which is one of the things we certainly see, but realize the impact of showing others that she can give was extremely important. I'll tweet out some links to some stories we've done about how women give differently, and also about Blacks, Asians, Hispanics, and some other kinds of things. People just give in different ways, and we need to understand that, and groups that are experimenting with that are learning a lot about just different styles. You have to have different fundraisers in the room. You have to have different volunteers in the room to better understand what it is that people want. I think that's been true in philanthropy all along, but it's more important as this country has changed so much that the appeals represent everyone. We had a piece from a scholar at Indiana University who wrote a piece about Black philanthropy, saying one of the things that he's most frustrated about, and he's a scholar of philanthropy, he said, we've been here all along. We've been giving for a really long time, and yet that's not acknowledged. And people keep treating us like we're new and emerging donors, and that's just not working for us. That's not the way to think about our giving. We have a long history of that, and we need to represent that. I find that sometimes when people talk about millennials as well, they'll talk about them instead of us. We need to recognize that there are lots of different people who give and have always been motivated to give to charity. We just need to understand them and segment them in the same ways that we do segmenting in other kinds of philanthropy, but really think hard about this. I think that's what's going to boost the giving rate. And Jeff, you and I talk a lot about how do we get beyond the 2% of national income that is given to charity every year. The only way to do that is to have more people giving. And so, to the extent that we have more people who have capacity to give, philanthropy is not going to grow.
Mm-hmm. Such a good point. You're talking about the investment in STEM reminds me that it's not just advocacy groups and human rights groups that are benefiting from activist donors.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing a lot of money going into science.
Yep.
Science-based organizations that haven't traditionally done a lot of fundraising are seeing a lot of interest from their members and their alums to combat what they see as a decline of appreciation for science. Obviously,
and the huge growth that technology, I think everybody sees the advantage, and so donors are really excited about what they can do to make sure that technology and science really changes our lives.
Mm-hmm. Any other tips for reaching new audiences for organizations that are trying to do that?
The smartest thing is, to look at the data and to really understand where you're already doing well and to be able to work on that and then to bring in other kinds of people to the cause. So, I think most groups could find pockets of success and they just need to build on those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. What about board recruitment?
Board recruitment is usually important. One of the most dispiriting facts we've probably printed in the last year is the fact that there's a study that was done looking at board membership this year versus 20 years ago, and the diversity has not changed at all.
Oh, no.
Not one bit of change.
In 20 years?
Yes, and there's still a number of boards that are completely composed of white men.
That's a bad not trend.
That needs to change. And, that's a key piece of this movement, and thinking differently about who governs the organization, who's brought in to do that. And some groups have made tremendous strides, but the overall look, and BoardSource did this study, and I think they were really upset to find that there were, we've been talking about this for a long time, and yet there really has not been any change.
That is a little challenging. So what's going on with online giving? That's been a growing field for quite some time now.
It is, and Facebook is just going gangbusters in terms of the amount they're raising for charitable organizations.
So remind us what Facebook did in terms of why.
One of the things they did 3 years ago is they put in a bunch of giving tools to help nonprofits do better. And in that time, they say that $1 billion has been raised for charity. They just offered a report on that. And so things that they've done makes it really easy for people to set up a fundraising campaign of their own. And one of the most popular tools that they did is this birthday fundraising tool. If I say it's my birthday and the cause I care about is X, and I encourage all my friends, they can give me a gift if they want, but really what I want them to give is to my favorite cause. That's very inspiring, and $300 million was raised in a year just from these Facebook birthday fundraisers. And from groups that
$300 million
are not necessarily the biggest groups in the country, a lot of organizations that struggle in other ways to raise money did extremely well on Facebook. So, it's not just that the big keep getting bigger. This is leveling the playing field a little bit for people. And as long as you can do a great job of recruiting people to raise money on your behalf, and that's where you should work and help them understand that they have these tools at their access. It doesn't cost anything for the person to say, I want to go out to my peers and do this fundraising. They feel like they're making a difference in a way, and it's a tremendous way to get more people to think about giving. The challenge on some of this fundraising, of course, is though that the fundraisers themselves don't necessarily have the names to continue recruiting. So there needs to be some effort to encourage those people who gave on your birthday to say, now make a gift to the charity and provide your name so that there can be more cultivation. That's going to be a tricky thing to do, but that's what groups are trying to find out. And obviously they're trying to work with the providers to say, we need to find some way to thank the donors ourselves, acknowledge them, and part of that is to get them in the database.
That's going to be a tough one. I'm not sure I would make that donation if I knew I was also turning my name over to the organization becoming a target for future.
And that's the big challenge with a lot of online giving is, as you make it easy and simple, but there are third parties that you're giving through, how do you get that information into your own database? And what can you do once somebody's interested in the cause to reach them? Can you use other Facebook advertising or do other kinds of things to get your message out? I think that's where we'll see a lot happening over the next few years, with people experimenting to see what happens. But, I think a long time ago we all said, oh, nobody's going to raise money on Facebook. And now money is being raised on Facebook, pretty serious money.
Yeah, and I have to say, one of the things we always look at when there's something like this, is this new money or is this money that just moved? I have to say, when when I see somebody, doing their birthday appeal, it's an organization I haven't supported before, but I may well do $25 or $50, and I never would have bought them a present for $25 or $50. But it's like,
so easy to do it right there.
Right, but it's like, sure, why not? I'll go ahead and do that. And those are all those
are add-on gifts.
Those are add-on gifts. That doesn't come out of somebody else's pocket. That's just
no, that's
as long as I haven't had to do 3 or 4 of them that week, I'll probably do that as well.
So now everybody tell Jeff when it's your birthday. You'll get a gift.
I might have to start culling my Facebook friends list here. So what about Giving Tuesday? I saw that it was up 27% this year.
Went gangbusters, and in part because nonprofits got very good about getting the word out early. I know I was starting to get email appeals a week before Giving Tuesday, and they came steadily throughout the week in the lead up, and people were doing lots of things to make sure that donors were excited, that volunteers were excited, that you knew about matching offers, and that you were encouraged to give. So that I think we've seen sophistication growing in how to use Giving Tuesday. Some people don't believe it as a fundraising tactic and use it more to thank their donors, and want to say that this is a moment for us to say we appreciate the giving and then to encourage more. Both things are really good. People are giving a way to engage, but I think it's a super sign for how year-end giving is going to go. And the economy being as good as it is a good sign for how the year-end will go. But to see a 27% increase is pretty dramatic.
Yeah, especially because it was pretty big last year.
You're building on a very big sum.
Right. So that's interesting. So also, we talked a little bit about peer-to-peer fundraising, which is very much the birthday appeals are peer-to-peer. The other thing that we've seen earlier on with the event, the experiential, I'm going to do a marathon, I'm going to do a bike race, will you support me, will you sponsor me? I think those have the same kind of challenge that you said with the online giving, is that a lot of times the organization, even if they do get the name, it's hard to convert those into long-term donors. I don't know if you've seen anything different.
Yeah, it's definitely that problem. And one of the other challenges that a lot of these athletic races and others have seen is that people want to be even more challenged than they were before, both physically or in other ways. It's not enough to do just a walkathon or a running race. They need to do something that is even tougher. So, we did an interview with the guy who runs the Pan Mass Challenge, which is one of the really big, and they're talking about all kinds of different ways to get people involved. They're thinking about doing something after New Year's Day, when people, really need to be motivated to do some kind of a race or anything like that. But, they said it's a very different mindset than it was when people were excited to do a walkathon for charity, when it was a new thing. And now it's not new and it's not challenging enough. So, what is the next generation of these events going to be?
Talk about challenging. Yeah, I have friends who do a week-long bike thing in the Rockies that they train all year for. They're trying to get me to go on that. And I said, I'm waiting for the Lazy Boy Retire Marathon.
I think other people are starting to think about that too.
That's sure what all this increases, what all this challenge is about. So another disturbing article, several articles you've been talking about, and studies that you referred to, declining trust in philanthropy. So I hate to see that.
Yeah, and we have to recognize, of course, that there's declining trust in all institutions in society, and I'm in the world where it's declining very fast in the press. So, but for sure, people have less trust in nonprofits than they did. I think that's part of what's behind that decline in giving. But you've also seen a lot of investigative reporting about charities, and some really disturbing scandals, and that worries people about where their money is going. The rise of things like GoFundMe campaigns that maybe aren't legitimate, those kinds of things, people are just worried about. They don't know what's run by a charity versus what's run by somebody in their basement. So there are a lot of things that are coming together that are causing people to feel that they have less trust. And I think it's important that nonprofits really very legitimate, good organizations talk out about the value, about how careful they are with the use of their money, and don't expect that people necessarily think you're good because you are a nonprofit. We have to recognize that some people are really skeptical. I think just proving your impact with a few simple facts really can get over that. But there is not a great deal of trust right now in any institution, and that is part of philanthropy. We're also seeing a lot of attacks on the very wealthy. So, we were talking earlier about Michael Bloomberg's gift, and, the number of things in the popular press attacking him for his giving that we just had, this huge running list of them. There are a lot of people who, because they're upset about the role of the wealthy in society, take it out on their philanthropy. There have been a lot of books being written about philanthropy these days, and it's terrific that philanthropy is getting that attention, but it is leading to more questions. A lot of people may have read Winners Take All, which is a very scathing look at philanthropy. Rob Reich, a Stanford professor, just wrote something called Just Giving, which looks at ways to encourage middle class and other Americans to give, to use the tax code differently, but he also looks at the ways the wealthy give and all the tax benefits they receive, and says, why aren't we asking more questions about how our own tax dollars are all going to subsidize these gifts? Should we be looking at them a little bit more carefully? So I think there's an ethos out there of questioning philanthropy, and in our pages, certainly a lot of foundation officials and nonprofit leaders push back, but I'd like to see more of that, because I think that's out there, and it's important to say, what would happen if giving went away? What would happen to some of the institutions in our communities if there were no philanthropists? I think when people realized that they would lose their local theater, their local environmental group, their local United Way, they would realize that charitable giving is really important, and that we don't want to lose any of that.
We look at some very large advocacy givers, like the Koch brothers on the right and George Soros on the left, and Michael Bloomberg, wherever he fits into that continuum. So I think people look at that skeptically. I think that people are influencing public policy with their philanthropy and wondering if that's okay.
Exactly. And the partisan divide that we have in this country just is exacerbated by that. And certainly some of these scandals that we've seen recently with Facebook targeting George Soros, that's just added a level of suspicion on both sides.
I think in that backdrop, I think it's important that we look at our own organizations and are as transparent as possible, and have disaster communications plans with our donors. If something, a crisis arises, that we're able to communicate very quickly, what happened and why. And I think if you look at it, there have been a number of things that the nonprofit organizations have not done well, or have reason that people are questioning the way the dollars are being spent. So I think that's something we need to take some umbrage with and see what we can do, especially in our own organizations.
Yes, absolutely. And we're running a piece later this week from Dan Cardinale of Independent Sector, basically saying, nonprofits have to speak out more, and we actually need to seek more regulation. The IRS needs to be stronger in watching us, and we need some steps. We need to do it, but the regulators need to call out the bad apples. There may not be many of them, but somebody needs to do something about those ones that are not using their tax money well.
Right. And I think this is partly what we're seeing too with we see a lot of increase in donors who want to restrict their giving. There's no longer that trust in the institution. There's certainly plenty of organizations that have done that. It's always encouraging when I work with a client and I'll talk to the donors and I say, where would you like your donation to go? And they say, well, they know where they need it. Wherever they say they need it. Like, I don't get to hear that very often anymore. I'm glad that somebody still has that sort of relationship with their donors. So what about the transfer of wealth? We've been talking about it for over a decade. When the Boston College report came out, whatever that was, 15 or 20 years ago, about the trillions of dollars that are going to be transferred. And I guess it's a little bit like climate change. It's actually here now, right?
It is here now. And I know it's hard for people to believe, because there was so much skepticism and people didn't see the results as fast as they expected after that famous report came out, and everybody invested in planned giving and didn't see it happen. But it really is here now. And the folks at the National Center for Rural Entrepreneurship did a great study to look at how much money is out there. And they said $9 trillion is going to change hands. And they took a different tack than the Boston College people did, and they said, let's just look at it at if 5% of that went to charitable causes, because 5% is obviously the amount that if it goes into a foundation, they have to grant out 5% every year. That's a reasonable target for us to look at and that philanthropy could expect. If that happened and all that money went into philanthropy, we'd see the equivalent of 10 foundations as big as the Gates Foundation. So there's a lot of money out there to be had, and it's incredibly important for people to start talking about ways to transfer that wealth. The time is indeed here, and investing in that paid off for the groups that are doing a lot of planned giving work. One of the findings we just reported on today was the belief that what donors were asked, what would make them want to make a planned gift, and they said they love talking to young fundraisers about that because then they feel the legacy that they're passing on. And I think traditionally we might have assigned an older fundraiser to have that conversation because it's a tricky conversation. We know that we're getting up to possibly talking about death, and that's hard. But when a person can see that the money is going to go to this younger generation, it makes them very excited about that, and that's who they want to talk to about it. So I hope that leads to some organizations changing their strategies and finding better ways to get that word out.
And we're absolutely seeing it. I mean, when we talk about things like donors talking about RMDs and what they do with that, and donors thinking about giving money now as opposed to putting it into planned gifts, the conversations are happening and people are thinking about it. And as we talk to donors about their plans and their priorities, we're getting more people that say, would you consider a legacy gift to this organization? They would consider a legacy gift. A lot of people are starting to think about their legacy, about what happens after they're gone, and how much money do I really need to leave the kids? And is there something else that I could be doing with this? So those conversations are happening. Something else I wanted to ask you about, you'd recently published an article, you did an article about the top charities, America's favorite charities, and trends over the last 10 years, and how some of them have grown. And you called out specifically Doctors Without Borders and Rotary Club, who had seen significant increases in their fundraising over the last 10 years. So what are you seeing there? The ones who have seen significant increases over a decade, what did they do? How did they do that?
I think the groups that did well are those that risked something and went against conventional wisdom in various ways. And it's hard to do that when you're a big organization and putting that in the way. But some of these groups, they just turned upside down how they look at revenue. Some of the disease charities looked at how they invested in research, for example, and found that the more results they were getting, the more other donors wanted to give. So it really, it's a combination of looking at mission and at development tactics that made a big difference. So it's really that top 100 charities, it's a pretty elite list. It's hard for people to break in, but we did see a few of them do that. And I'll send folks a link to that story so you can see the direct stories of how they did what they did. But a lot of it is getting buy-in from the board and willing to try some new things. And I hope that, if you see those case studies, it'll help you think about ways that you can do it yourself and show that there's good evidence of what can happen when you make these changes.
So last question for you, and then we'll turn to your questions and see what other things you'd like to talk about relative to trends and what you're all seeing. But speaking of making a big investment or going against the trend, there's been a lot of discussion about the cost of doing business, and the cost of fundraising, and whether that's an important metric or not. And organizations that conversation is changing with Better Business Bureau and Charity Navigator and GuideStar saying, okay, we're not going to use that as such a primary metric in terms of effectiveness. So has that conversation changed, and what are they doing to measure effectiveness instead, if it's not what percentage goes to program?
How do you measure impact is the really big challenge that I think we'll all be grappling with for at least another decade until people figure it out. But certainly, I think the conversation with the watchdogs has changed, that people are saying, look at the impact, ask about results. But there still are a lot of people who use the traditional metrics of how much is spent on fundraising. It still is commonly out there. We published an op-ed from Ann Wollaston of Board Source last week in which she excoriated the New York State Attorney General's office for putting out its Penny for Charities report saying, we are looking at the wrong thing and you're distorting what it is that nonprofit should be all about. So, I think a lot of the arguments that she amassed there are things that it would be important to share with boards and really help people understand it. So, I think while we've made progress in helping the public understand that fundraising costs are really something you shouldn't be looking at, that message hasn't fully gotten there, and there hasn't been enough to show that investing in fundraising ends up leading to bigger results and better programs and more mission. So that argument is going to need to be continued, and in some ways I wish that some kind of branding and advertising company would help spread that message, because I think it needs a catchier way of, because it's so important for donors to think about that, and yet we're not all the way there yet.
And there's actually several audiences for this too. There's your donors, but then there's also your board.
Your board is
I'm
really
seeing that a lot and talking to boards where they may be very proud of their meager amount that they spend on their fundraising or on their administration, and then but then they complain about all these other factors in the organization, about not being professionally run, not getting good staff. And I say, you're starving your organization. All the things that you're complaining about are because you are under-resourcing. So I think you just mentioned a magic word a moment ago, and I think some people would take issue with us for not having a slide on metrics.
Yes.
And the rise of metrics and the importance of metrics. But
fair enough.
for development professionals, I think that's particularly important, because it's our job, especially to sell to leadership, why it matters. If you invest $1 in my department, what can you expect as a return? And our metrics can help us do that, so that we can show over a 3-year period of time, if we invest in this. For example, if we bring on a new major gift officer, we have this many people who are not in a portfolio, who have been shown to have potential, and over an 18 to 24 month period, that person will develop those relationships up to a point where they're more than paying for their salary. They're hopefully bringing 4 times their salary, and you can use numbers to prove the fact that you need that investment in that position. I think that's something we're going to need to do a much better job of in development departments, in tracking where it's coming from and where it's going and what's working, and making the case for your organization to invest in the capacity building.
Yeah, it's extremely important, and doing something to curb the turnover of fundraisers, because certainly the other thing, if people are really changing jobs every 18 to 24 months, it's hard to keep donors in the fold. And that may mean salaries, working conditions, more people actually doing the job of fundraising. So I think there's a lot of reasons why fundraising isn't as effective as it could be.
Right. Well, there are a lot of reasons fundraising is not as effective as it could be, and there are a lot of ways that fundraising is not as effective as it could be. But let's give folks a chance to talk about what their concerns are, and I'm going to invite Sarah to come on and see, have we got, hello, thank you.
Hi.
Any questions yet?
This has been excellent. Just thank you so much for providing all these wonderful, all the trends that we're seeing in the marketplace. We do have questions, so let's get started. We have a question that is asking to share the 3 most important takeaways and next steps based on the data you shared, especially year-end thinking about strategies for 2019.
Wow, the 3, not the 2, not the 4. Well, I would start with 1, would be the last thing that we just said, is that, make your plan very specific, and look at where you've been raising the money in the past, and where do you think you have the best return on investment going forward. It has been traditionally, major gifts has been the place where we've seen the most growth and the most potential for return. Many organizations may have, I don't want to say we've over-invested in major gifts. I don't think you can over-invest, but I think that we may have neglected others. So looking at taking a long-term view, try to take a 3 to 5 year view of building your program and thinking about how am I going to do that? So that's when you would focus on things like the mid-level donors, which is your pipeline to your next group of major gifts. And also mid-level donors are very good, if you're effective in working with them, are very good potential for planned gifts. They go straight to a legacy gift. Skip major gifts altogether and just go straight to a legacy gift. So that'd be 1, maybe that's a couple.
That's a couple.
Yeah. Another one?
I think I would look at ways to demonstrate the impact of programs and doing that in a compelling way and a consistent way. That's what donors really hunger for. When they're asked why they don't give more, it's always because they don't know enough about the organization's impact. If they heard more about it or heard a more compelling need, they say that they would give more, and we're in a point in the economy where many people can afford to give more, so we should be encouraging that. I would also say to focus on diversity issues, to really make sure if your organization isn't already got an effort underway to be sure you're reaching women, people of color, anybody who is just not a traditional donor to your organization. Is really different for different types of groups, but to focus on ways to make a measurable difference in the next year. Sometimes this topic seems really hard to get a handle on, but take some simple steps of things that you can do to make a difference.
And it's not just donors, it's your volunteer leadership, it's your board, it's your staff, it's your constituents, really looking across the board. Are we reaching everybody we could be reaching with our mission?
And it's even things, the Sierra Club did a great look at the photographs that it uses in its materials, and they found that it did not have very many people of color, and they found that people who are Hispanic really like doing outdoor activities with their families, so they did more to show families, and that made a big difference. So it's things that may seem really simple, but it's understanding how people give and how they interact with your cause.
Right.
Excellent. We've had a couple of questions regarding frontline fundraisers. One in particular, frontline fundraisers are becoming more difficult to develop and find. Any suggestions?
One of the things we're seeing a lot of people doing is putting more into training the people that they do have as a way to make sure that they have the best staff, and also that people feel excited about staying at the organization because they're growing in various ways. So sometimes it is about raises and giving people money, but it's often about developing their careers and giving them new challenges and new ways to engage. So I'm seeing a lot of people looking at ways to do that.
I was going to say, grow your own. It's a great place to start. Create, and this too, where we find that organizations are under-resourced. They often don't. They don't even have the support staff that they need. They put all their money into frontline fundraisers, and then those people leave, and they've got nobody. They've gotten a bench. They haven't brought anybody up. So having a better advancement system within the organization, bringing in younger talent, having internships, converting those interns into full-time paid staff positions, training them, and giving them new opportunities. We've seen that be very effective. And the other is bringing people in from other fields. There are people who had good careers in business, banking, high net worth individuals, investment. I would say a lot of investment people who transition over to plan giving, looking outside the field. But then we have to. It's challenging when they come into a nonprofit environment. Understanding the rules are different and the resources are different. That's a good way to do it.
So along those lines, Jeff, you mentioned a metric of 4 times salary for the fundraiser, but you were referencing this related to major gifts. Is this a metric that applies overall to fundraising? And this person had often heard the measure at more like 10 times the salary.
It really depends on the position. I mean, a seasoned major gift officer who's been there a long time and has a mature portfolio, it could easily be 10 times. A planned gift officer could be that kind of that level. Generally, and these are broad numbers, and I hesitate. I would not say that this is best practice, because right away we get into that dynamic again of what should we be, when is it too much, that we're putting in. But generally, if you can spend 25 cents to raise $1, that's a good investment. So if you're raising 4 times your salary or your salary and benefits, then it's pretty hard to argue that that's not a good investment for an organization. And that should be a reasonable goal for a frontline fundraiser. But do you have any? Yeah,
no, I think you're right. And I know the Association for Healthcare Philanthropy has looked at this a great deal, and they have some good tools to help people think about that, and some studies over time to be able to show what difference it makes.
Right. And then I think it's really difficult too, because what is a frontline fundraiser? Another thing that we're doing in terms of helping develop positions from within is giving everybody a portfolio. So even your, your younger staff, your folks that are more on the annual giving side, also have a portfolio. As you do more with mid-level donors, there are more people who are contacting folks. So other people can be in a position of bringing in, having direct relationship with donors. But, what counts and, how do you divide that up? Really depends on where you are in the organization.
Yeah, excellent. This is a question relating to, I would imagine, to some of the tax changes, but are nonprofits desperate to raise money now? Even very prominent nonprofits are sending multiple mailings with quote-unquote junk and doing tag day type fundraising.
Well, that's interesting. Is there more junk being mailed? I don't know that that's necessarily the case. I don't know if we'd have to talk to the Direct Marketing Association about how much junk is out there, which is a word they won't use.
They will not
in the direct marketing world. Part of what I think people might be responding to is there's a lot more going on online too. There's a lot more email solicitations. I think the level of bombardment with messages, and having just come off of Giving Tuesday, yes, my mailbox was full of appeals that I just had to delete without opening. I admit it. But so I think that's part of it, is that we have more ways to reach people and we're getting better at using those various tools. But that then makes it a lot harder for us to separate from the clutter and make our message stand out, so people will open your email and will click on the link and respond to the appeal that you put out. And as much as that has taken over in the last number of years, you can't abandon direct mail. The mail is still, a tried and true vehicle. So what people are doing is combining their messaging in the mail with their messaging online, with their messaging on their web, and making sure that they've integrated their appeal across channels.
And in part because we all get so much email, direct mail stands out. It's less usual to get things in our mailboxes, so nonprofits are capitalizing on that and trying to make the letter stand out. So, I definitely have not seen any diminution in the number of appeals I'm getting this holiday season.
And I have to say, I've seen some success with handwritten notes. We talk about personalizing an ask. A handwritten note is such a rare gem. I mean, you can't not open an envelope with somebody's actual personal writing on it. You've got to open it up and see, and they're a person's return address from a real, a real home somewhere.
And thank you notes coming up are hugely successful. And that's a great thing for volunteers, for board members to be able to feel like they're doing something.
Right. That's a good point.
Yeah, agreed. So let's see here. We have about 3 minutes left. I'm going to change course here a little bit and just go back to hiring fundraisers and retention. This person commented that her last 2 searches ended with the organization not making a decision and restarting the search. And this was referring to CDO/vice president level positions. Any commentary or suggestions that might be helpful?
Boy, that's a challenging one. Well, first of all, it is really important to make the right hire. I mean, it's very expensive to make a bad hire, to make the wrong hire in a chief development officer position, especially. So, I'll put in a plug for executive search. It's expensive, and we all look at that and say, oh my gosh, I got to pay 30% of the salary to have somebody search when I could just put out, a job description on Idealist. But in fact, putting that time in up front to do that right, and because what happens is then you're going out to people who aren't looking for work. If somebody's happy in their job and they're good at it, they're not looking at Idealist. They don't know what's being posted out there. They need somebody to call them and say, hey, here's what's your next opportunity? I might have it here for you.
And I have heard a number of people feeling that the pressure is just so intense that they don't necessarily want to be a chief development officer anymore. And so, I think that's something the field at large, that's a challenge for the chief executive to change the nature of the job and how people are feeling about that. It's not a good sign that we find the right people. There are a dearth of great chief development officers, but still, I think the fact that we're seeing so many demands placed on people may be causing some of the burnout.
Well, I'll go to, on that, I'll just pivot to something we see a lot and I've talked about a lot, is the culture of philanthropy in our organization. That means we're not talking about development, something that happens over in the corner with that team over there and the rest of us can go about our business. It's about everybody understanding and being involved in philanthropy in some way. And we've been seeing some pushback on that from program people thinking it's a power grab by the fundraisers. But it's important that you be good communicators with your senior leadership, your peers in other departments, so that they do understand how important their role is relative to fundraising, and you can spread that pressure out across the organization and share the credit at the same time.
That's a great point.
Yeah, thank you. So it looks like we're out of time. Many of the trends and questions have been raised. A lot of our content focuses on these questions on our website, so make sure to check out our resources on the Campbell & Company website. But Jeff and Stacy, thank you so much for sharing your words of wisdom. Stacy, it's just lovely to have you with us. We're just so honored and fortunate to have your time and your insights and expertise. So if you have additional questions, please feel free to get in touch with us, and we'll make sure to return your emails. And on behalf of everyone at Campbell & Company, we wish you a wonderful holiday season and Happy New Year. We are looking forward to kicking off 2019, and we hope you are as well. So thank you so much.
Best fundraising year ever, 2019.
Yes.
You heard it here first.
We sure hope so.
Hold us to it.
Yeah. All right. So thanks so much, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.